Yes, Your Honor. May I make appearances?
Yes.
My name is William Booth, and today I'm joined by my second chair, Ms. Samantha DiGiuseppe, and together we represent the plaintiff in today's action, Ms. Jordan Street. We have some housekeeping matters and a few stipulations to read onto the record before we get going today.
Okay.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Jordan Avey, last name spelled A-V-E-Y. Here on behalf of the defendant in this case, Reese Taylor. I'm joined by my co-counsel, Rima Sahakian, and we also have some stipulations and housekeeping matters to address with the court whenever you're ready.
Okay, plaintiff, go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. First, because of the online format of this jurisdiction, I ask permission to remain seated throughout examinations and statements in today's trial.
That's fine. All of you are free to stand however you please, as long as you're cognizant of the frame of the camera.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, we have no more housekeeping, ready to move on to those stipulations.
Okay, go ahead.
So before we started this, before we got to trial today, I was able to reach out with opposing counsel, and we decided that specifically 3 exhibits we would stipulate to their admissibility pending you admitting them in at pretrial. So those exhibits specifically are Exhibit 2, Exhibit 14, and Exhibit 15. Exhibit 2 is a picture of the practice fields at Waco High School. 14 and 15 are the reports generated by the medical examiner from McLennan County who performed the autopsy on Miss Rory Street, the decedent in this case.
Okay, and so defendant, you agree that those can be admitted?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, then 2, 14, and 15 are admitted.
And finally, Your Honor, second stipulation is to exclude certain portions of Miss Jess Merriweather's deposition testimony, and specifically referring to page 5, lines 6 through 9, where Jess Merriweather speaks about the character of Rory and how Rory was hanging out with people that she thought were drug dealers, and therefore she assumed that possibly Rory was involved with drugs as well. We've stipulated that that testimony won't be covered in today's trial.
Okay, defense, you agree with that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, that's fine.
And with that, we're ready to move on to opening statements.
Okay, great. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We did meet and confer with opposing counsel before trial today, and we were also able to reach a few stipulations. Our first stipulation is that no one today will mention anything about a subsequent remedial measure that was taken by Coach Taylor after Rory Street's death, and that is for adding tents and putting water and Gatorade underneath them at practice.
Okay.
Our second stipulation is that no one today will mention any evidence about a prior incident that Coach Taylor had with another student at another high school before he was hired at Waco High School.
Okay, and plaintiff, do you agree with both of those?
Yes, that is what we agreed to.
Okay.
And Your Honor, as for housekeeping matters, because in this jurisdiction, we are doing a bench trial. However, we know that there are outside evaluators. After we lay proper foundation and move in any exhibits, we will be asking for the court's permission to publish the exhibits to the court. And that is so that other evaluators may be able to see those exhibits.
Okay, and you don't have to ask permission before publishing each time. Just go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. And at this time, we also invoke the rule, but we would ask to keep the parties in the courtroom constructed.
Okay.
And with that, defense is ready for trial.
Okay.
And Your Honor, there was one final thing that I left out. I would ask at this time that you take judicial notice of the fact that on September 7th, 2018, which is the day in question in today's trial, between 2:51 p.m. and 5:51 p.m., the temperature in Waco, Texas rose from 100 degrees to 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that information comes from Exhibit 21, which is already in evidence, and it's a weather report from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for Waco, Texas on September 7th.
Is there any objection to this?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, then judicial notice will be taken of the temperature at those times.
And Your Honor, with that, we are ready to go on to opening statements.
Okay, proceed.
May it please the court, counsel. On September 7th, 2018, Rory Street died on a practice field at Waco High School. She was 18 years old, the star of her soccer team, and everyone who knew her knew that she had a bright future ahead of her. But then Rory Street died from heat stroke. And she died from heat stroke because this defendant, her coach, Reese Taylor, caused and forced Rory to exert herself to the point of death. Now, September 7th was a 105-degree day in Waco. Soccer practice started at 3:15 p.m. in the heat of the afternoon. About an hour into practice, the defendant, Mr. Taylor, lost his temper with Rory. And when the defendant loses his temper, well, the students know someone's going to pay. Today, it was Rory's turn. So Mr. Taylor sent Rory to run sprints on repeat, without breaks, without water. His specific instructions to Rory were to run until you pass out. But even when Rory followed these instructions and went and ran those sprints, it still wasn't good enough for the defendant. So he called Rory back over to the field. He had Rory line up, and then he told Rory's teammates one after another to go and perform a slide tackle against Rory Street. And what a slide tackle is essentially asking a player to go and knock the legs out from under another player. Over and over again. Rory had her legs knocked out from under her and she slammed to the ground. And each time that she tried to pull herself back up, she became more tired, more overheated, more dehydrated. One time during this drill, when Rory was too weak to stand, she couldn't pull herself up back off from the ground. Well, that still wasn't good enough for this defendant, who walked over to Rory, grabbed her by the back of her jersey and yanked her to her feet, looked her in the eyes and said, "Keep going." After being tackled about 15 times by her teammates, Rory collapsed again, but this time was the final time. Her internal body temperature was so high that her heart just couldn't keep pumping. And lying on that soccer field, surrounded by her teammates and by the coach who was supposed to watch over her during practice, Rory Street took her last breath. Your Honor, and that's why we're here today. Because there is a difference between discipline and physical abuse. This defendant, Mr. Reese Taylor, crossed the line from discipline into physical abuse with Rory Street on that day. And when he crossed that line, an 18-year-old high school senior lost her life. We're here today to hold Mr. Taylor responsible for his anger and for his actions. Because disciplining a student, that should never result in death. And today, I represent Jordan Street, Rory's mom. She's brought a wrongful death case against the defendant, Reese Taylor, for negligently causing her daughter's death. Under the law, Mr. Taylor owed Rory, his player, a duty to conduct practice and administer discipline in a safe and reasonable manner. When this defendant forced Rory to engage in dangerous and unnecessary drills in 105-degree heat, well, he breached that duty to Rory, and he caused her death. And today, we'll prove that this defendant knew, or at least should have known, of the severe health risks associated with the discipline that Mr. Taylor was trying to enforce. And even though those risks were staring Mr. Taylor in the face and chose to ignore them anyway. Now, as Your Honor knows, it is our burden to prove all of this to you today, and we welcome that burden. We'll meet it with evidence, with witnesses, and with facts. And that's why today you'll hear from Aubree Sitterson, a senior soccer team member at Waco High at the same time Rory was there. She's going to tell you about what happened at Rory's last practice on September 7th. And she'll tell you exactly how the defendant was treating Rory in the moments leading up to her death. You'll hear how the defendant used multiple drills to punish Rory because he felt that she was being lazy, that she wasn't listening well enough to his complaints. You'll hear that this defendant pushed Rory to the point of exhaustion, dehydration, and then kept pushing. And when Rory was no longer able to stand on her own 2 feet, even then, Mr. Taylor didn't stop. He walked over, grabbed her by that jersey, yanked her up, and forced her to keep going. Ms. Sitterson will describe just how brutal the defendant could be when he took his anger out like that on a player. You'll hear how Rory fell to the ground, convulsing, not breathing, and that she passed away right in front of her teammates. You'll see Rory Street's official autopsy report, which states that Rory passed away from sudden cardiac death. And you'll also see an expert report from a cardiologist who's going to explain that Rory's behavior and symptoms on September 7th during that practice, well, they were entirely consistent with heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And today, we're not the only side that has a burden because the defendant has raised an affirmative defense. The defendant chose to take on the burden of proving to you that Rory's negligence caused her own death. The defense is alleging that at some point during or before soccer practice on September 7th, Rory Street ingested a small amount of cocaine and that this caused her death. And there's a toxicology report in this case that you'll look at that said that Rory had a nominal amount of cocaine in her system, 60 nanograms per milliliter at the time of her death. And we're not going to dispute that. But the problem for the defendant is that they won't be able to prove to you that that cocaine had anything to do with Rory's death. They won't be able to tell you when she ingested it or even how much. And when you look at the official autopsy report, and then you look at the report that we have from our expert, Dr. McConaughey, you're going to see that it's clear. Rory did not die from any cocaine in her system. The evidence is going to show that she died from heat stroke, from overexertion because this defendant forced Rory to physically exert herself to the point of death. Rory Street should be here today. She should be here tomorrow. She should be here the day after that. She should have been here to graduate from high school last year. Should have just finished her freshman year of college. And what's so terrible about this case, Your Honor, is that Rory's death, it was entirely preventable. But this defendant crossed a line. He crossed the line between discipline and physical abuse, and it was Rory Street who paid the price. Your Honor, at the end of this trial, I'm going to ask you to find Mr. Taylor liable for his actions. Thank you.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, there is one thing that Mr. Booth and I absolutely agree on. What happened to Rory Street was tragic. And the loss that Rory's mother is facing is something that no parent should ever have to experience. But the truth is that the evidence in this case will show that the cause of Rory's death wasn't due to any choices made by Coach Reese Taylor that day, her soccer coach. Instead, the evidence will show that Rory died from a sudden cardiac death, and that was caused by cocaine in her system. Cocaine that Rory and Rory alone chose to take that day. Today, Your Honor, the issue for you to decide is whether Coach Taylor will be held responsible for Rory's choices. Now, you just heard a lot about Coach Reese Taylor and Mr. Booth's opening statement, and so I want to get the chance to tell you a little bit more about him. And when he takes this witness stand, he'll get to introduce himself. He'll tell you that he has been the coach at the Waco High School women's soccer team for about 6 years now. But he's been coaching soccer for over 2 decades at this point. Now, he'll be the first person to tell you that he has learned a lot about how to coach teenagers since starting his coaching career. And one thing that he's learned is that in order to maximize their potential and help them become better players, he has to push them. Now, Coach Taylor will admit to you, he runs a tight ship. He's a tough coach, but he'll also be the first person to tell you that his players are his top priority, making them perform better, but also keeping them safe. Now, we're here today because despite Coach Taylor's best efforts and best intentions, something horrific happened on that soccer field on September 7th, 2018. And the plaintiff's mother has said that it's Coach Taylor's fault. But the plaintiff has the burden today to prove those things to you by showing that Coach Taylor had a duty, that he breached that duty, and that it caused Rory's death. However, we are confident that the plaintiff will fail to meet that burden today because instead, the evidence will show 2 things. First, that Coach Taylor's actions were reasonable under the circumstances. And second, that it was Rory's own choices that caused her death that day. So let's talk about that first thing that the evidence will show, that Coach Taylor's actions were reasonable under the circumstances. Now, to understand that, we have to go back to Waco High School, the soccer field on September 7th, 2018. Coach Taylor has just started her daily practice and it's hot. It's September in Waco. It's about between 3 and 4 p.m. So it's scorching outside. But Coach Taylor and his team, they're used to that. They practice in September all the time. Heck, they practiced the day before. So they start their scrimmage like it's nothing new. Now, as Coach Taylor watches his girls spread out across the field, he starts to recognize pretty quickly that some of them just aren't putting in the maximum effort. And he knows that with high schoolers, you have to discipline them in order to keep a team ready for any season that they're going to have in the future. So he sees Aubree Sitterson, a senior on his team, kind of goofing around. And he tells her, you need to go to Burma Road. Now, as you just heard, Burma Road is a tradition at Waco High School. It was not started by Coach Taylor. In fact, when Coach Taylor takes the stand today, he'll tell you that when he was a student at Waco High School, his soccer coach used to tell him he had to go run Burma Road. In fact, when you hear the deposition testimony of the plaintiff, Jordan Street, today, you'll hear that when she was a student 35 years ago at Waco High, she had to run Burma Road. And really what it is, it's a disciplinary drill. The students will run 30 yards, then they'll dribble the soccer ball for another 30, shoot on the goal, and then they'll bear crawl back to the starting line. But Coach Taylor will tell you that this isn't something that these players aren't prepared for. Not only have most of them done it before, but they're in peak physical condition. And as somebody who's run Burma himself, Coach Taylor knows exactly how far each of his team members can go. So once Aubree is sent to Burma, Coach starts watching the girls again. And about 15 minutes pass when he starts to notice that another one of his players just isn't totally there. She's goofing around, she's missing passes, she's not really going for the ball. And it's surprising to him because it's his star player, Rory Street. But Coach Taylor knows you cannot treat two players differently. You have to discipline them the same way. So he sends Rory out to Burma Road as well. But just a few minutes go by and he looks out at Burma Road and he sees, 20 yards away, that Rory still isn't putting in the effort that she's known for. So he realizes that Burma just isn't going to cut it that day. So he calls her back and he says, we're going to try something new. Now, as you heard, at that point, Coach Taylor decided to have Rory participate in a slide tackling drill. And Mr. Booth is right. This was the first time that Coach Taylor had ever performed the drill in this particular way. But you'll hear today that slide tackling, it is a big part of soccer. And it is something that Rory had absolutely done before and was more than prepared to actually do the drill that day. But something went horribly wrong during that drill. And after 15 times, Rory fell to the ground and she couldn't get back up. And she started to seize and she started to convulse on the field. And Coach Taylor, he watched his living nightmare as a coach play out right in front of him. Knowing that one of the kids that he cared for like a daughter was dying and that he could do absolutely nothing to stop it. And he was just left wondering, why? Now, that brings me to the second thing that the evidence will show today, that it was Rory Street's own choices that caused her death. Today, we will bring you an expert report in this case. And in that expert report, our expert, Spencer London, will talk about Rory's cause of death. Now, just to be clear, it is undisputed that Rory died from a sudden cardiac death. But what is disputed is what actually caused that cardiac death. Now, as you just heard from Mr. Booth, the plaintiff says that this was caused by heat stroke and heat exhaustion. But Your Honor, today the evidence will show that that's just not true. Because when you read that expert report, you'll see that Rory had cocaine in her system at practice. And when cocaine is in your system, it creates a lethal combination where your body can no longer control its own temperature. So that combined with the 105-degree weather in the soccer practice, even though Rory had done those things for the last 4 years, it changed everything that day. But there is one more reason why you'll see today that Coach Taylor cannot be held responsible in this case. And that's because the plaintiff won't be able to meet their burden to prove that Rory's death was foreseeable. You see, nobody will come up on the witness stand today and tell you that they knew Rory had cocaine in her system that day. Aubree Sitterson, her best friend, didn't know. Her mother, Jordan Street, didn't know. And her coach certainly did not know. And more than that, Your Honor, you're going to hear today that they were all shocked to find that out. This wasn't a kid where you could think and you could foresee that she might have drugs in her system. So if her mom didn't know and her best friend didn't know, how in the world was her coach supposed to know? That's the question we're going to ask you to focus on today. Your Honor, mistakes were made on September 7th, 2018. But they weren't the mistakes of some overzealous soccer coach that was abusing his students. It was the cocaine, not the coach. And that is why at the end of this trial, I will stand before you and ask you to return the only verdict that is consistent with the facts, required by the law, and demanded by justice. A verdict finding Coach Reese Taylor not liable.
All right, plaintiff, if you want to call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. But before I call my first witness who is present today, I request permission to read in portions of the plaintiff, Ms. Jordan Street's deposition. It has been stipulated that Ms. Street is unavailable to testify today, and I gave notice to opposing counsel of the portions I plan to read.
Okay, go ahead.
And directing court and counsel to page 2 of Jordan Street's deposition, lines 6 through 16. Question. Good morning. Please state your name for the record. Answer. My name is Jordan Street. Question. How old are you? Answer. I'm 55 years old. Question. Where are you from? Answer. I live in Waco and have all my life. Question. Are you married? Answer. I am not. I was married, but my spouse passed away several years ago. Question. Do you have any children? Answer. I did. My daughter, Rory. Skipping down now on the same page, lines 23 to 24. Question. What happened to Rory? Answer. She died at soccer practice on September 7th, 2018. And nothing further from that deposition witness, Your Honor.
Okay, and does the defense have any portion that they wanted to read in at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. May I have permission to post the portions which have been provided to opposing counsel on the screen?
Yes.
Rima, can you please put up those highlighted portions? Thank you. And Your Honor, permission for my co-counsel and I to read this in question and answer format with
That's
myself asking the questions.
That's fine.
So starting on page 3 of Jordan Street's deposition, starting on line 3. So do you have any information or knowledge about what happened that day?
No, other than what I've heard from others about what happened, but I didn't see it.
Now starting on page 7 of the deposition, question starting on line 19. When you were playing soccer at Waco High, did you ever have to run Burma Road?
Hell yeah, we did. I remember doing that when we were dogging it, or if we weren't in the correct position or something, coach would send us off to run Burma Road. But I'll tell you this, none of my coaches ever made me or any other kid keep going when it was obvious we were exhausted. Discipline is one thing, but that is just dangerous.
Do you know what a slide tackle is?
Sure.
Are slide tackles part of the game of soccer?
Of course they are. Turn on any game and you're going to see players at every level performing slide tackles. That is part of the deal.
And now on page 9, starting on line 11 of the deposition, did you have any part in Coach Taylor being hired?
Yes, I was instrumental in getting Coach Taylor hired. I wish I hadn't been, but I was.
Why did you want Coach Taylor?
We wanted a winning coach. I wanted Rory to be coached by a winner. That was what we wanted, and we thought that Coach Taylor was the right person for that job. Looking back now, it was obviously a huge mistake on my part.
And Your Honor, that concludes our portion of the cross-examination of deposition witness Jordan Street.
Okay. Plaintiff?
Your Honor, plaintiff calls Aubree Sitterson.
Okay.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Aubree Sitterson.
And Miss Sitterson, it seems like I can't hear you that well. Is there any way to get a little closer to the microphone?
Can you hear me now?
I think that'll work. Now, how old are you, Aubree?
I'm 19.
Where do you live?
My hometown is here in Waco,
How long did you live in your hometown, Waco?
all my life.
You said you're 19. Are you currently in school?
Yes, I'm at Rice, but here for the summer in Waco. Rice is in Houston.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school at Waco High.
I want to turn your attention to the fall of 2018. At that time, what grade were you in Waco High?
I was a senior.
And Aubree, how did you become involved in this case?
Well, I was best friends and teammates with Street, and so I was there when she died.
Would you recognize a picture of Rory if you looked at one now?
Yes.
Could you please turn to Exhibit 3 of your exhibit notebook and let me know when you're there?
All right, I've got it.
Do you recognize the document that's marked as Exhibit 3?
Yes, that's Rory Street.
So you said that's a picture of Rory. Do you know about when that picture was taken?
It looks like it was taken about when she died, when she was in high school.
Is that a fair and accurate depiction of Rory Street as you knew her at that time?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, we offer this photograph marked as Exhibit 3 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
Ms. DiGiuseppe, can we display that image? Thank you. Now, Aubree, how long did you know Rory before the fall of 2018?
I've known her almost all my life. We played soccer together and we were really good friends. Either I was at her house or she was at my house, and we were very close.
Did you spend a lot of time together growing up?
Yes, we did.
In your opinion, was Rory a good soccer player?
Oh, she wasn't just good, she was great. She was the best on our team, and I thought for sure she would be a star.
Ms. DiGiuseppe, you can take that image down now. Now, Aubree, you told us that you were with Rory when she passed away. Do you remember what day that was?
That was that September afternoon in 2018.
What were you doing that day?
Well, we had soccer practice, so we had a scrimmage on the fields at Waco High.
When did that practice start?
It started about 3:15.
And what was the weather like that day, if you remember?
It was a scorcher. It was really hot. It had to be over 100 degrees. It was definitely a hot day.
Okay, so let's talk about what happened at practice on September 7th. Was there a plan for how practice was supposed to proceed that day?
Well, we were having a scrimmage, so we were doing just a practice game.
Is that how the practice actually turned out?
No. I mean, I got sent to go do Burma roads, which is kind of a drill. And then so did Rory.
Okay, so I want to back up. You said that you were sent to do a drill. What drill was that?
A Burma road.
Could you describe what Burma road is?
Well, first you sprint for 30 yards, and then you dribble the ball for 30 yards. You shoot a goal, and then you've got a bear crawl on the ground all the way back, which is about 60 yards. So it's a pretty intense drill that you just keep going.
And Aubree, where was practice being held that day?
On the fields at Waco High.
And when you were sent to go do this drill, Burma Road, where did you go?
Well, it's side field kind of next to the practice field is where we would go to do the Burma Road drill.
Would you recognize a photograph of the practice fields at Waco High if you looked at one now?
Yes, I would.
Could you turn to Exhibit 2 in your exhibit notebook and let me know when you're there?
I'm there.
Do you recognize the document that's marked as Exhibit 2 in that notebook?
Yes, it's a topside view of the fields.
Are those the fields you were on September 7th?
Yes, they are.
Ms. DiGiuseppe, can we display that image? Now, Aubree, could you describe what we're looking at in this photograph?
Well, that's the practice fields, and then it's marked with blue and red rectangles.
Okay, so what is marked by the blue rectangle in this image?
The blue rectangle is the practice field where we would do our scrimmages.
And how about that red box off to the side?
That's where we would do the Burma roads. That's where I was doing my Burma road.
So when you were in that red box, how far away were you from the rest of the team?
Maybe about 20 yards or so.
Ms. DiGiuseppe, we can take that photograph down. Thank you. Now, could you see Rory while you were doing the Burma road drill?
Yes, I could.
Did you see what was going on in the scrimmage with Rory?
I did. I could see and hear what was going on, kind of.
Did Rory participate fully in the scrimmage that day?
She started, but then she got sent over to do Burma roads with me. She wasn't doing well.
You said that she wasn't doing well. Why do you say that?
Well, I could hear Coach screaming at her, just really kind of angry and saying that she wasn't practicing well and she was going to send her over to do Burma roads and run her till she passed out.
And when you heard Mr. Taylor say, "Run until you pass out," could you see Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
And could you determine what his demeanor was like at that time?
Oh, he was really angry. I mean, he was screaming at the top of his lungs, and he was angry.
Now, after you heard Mr. Taylor instruct Rory to go run Burma with you, what happened?
Well, Rory came over to where I was, and we were doing them together, and she didn't look good at all.
I want to stop right there. You said that practice started around 3:15 or 3:30. Do you know what time it was when Rory joined you to do the Burma road drill?
It was a while later, around 4:30.
Okay, so you told us that you noticed something about Rory's appearance at that time. What?
She was really pale and just uncharacteristically just breathing hard and looked just worn out.
Now, when you saw that, did you ask Rory how she was feeling?
I did. I asked her how she was doing, and she said that her chest hurt and that she felt funny.
And man, when you heard that, how did you react?
I was a little concerned because it was uncharacteristic, but I didn't really do anything.
Did you ever get the chance to ask Rory more questions about how she felt?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Well, we got kind of interrupted by Coach, who was watching us and was angry at Rory. So she called Rory over.
You said that Mr. Taylor was angry. How could you tell?
Well, he said to get back over to the practice field, that he wasn't worth anything in practice, and that he said Rory thought she was special and he was going to show her how not special she was.
When you heard Coach Taylor yelling those things, what happened next?
Well, Rory went over and coach had Rory stand on the field and lined up all the other players in a line and told them that when he blew the whistle, that they'd run at Rory into a slide tackle, and just over and over again.
Aubree, could you explain what a slide tackle is?
A slide tackle is when you're going towards another player to steal the ball and you go at them sliding with your feet, but a lot of times you make contact, so you may end up with some cleats in your shins or something like that. It can get painful.
So you told us that Mr. Taylor was running a drill with slide tackles. Is this a drill that you were familiar with?
This was never seen anything like this done before in practice ever. Not in this way, one after another, no.
Had you practiced slide tackles before?
Yes, we practiced them before, but not in this way.
What happened when this drill started?
Well, Rory got tackled the first time and just kind of collapsed to the ground. It just couldn't do well, and coach was really angry and jerked Rory back up, grabbed her shirt, just pulled her up off the ground, and then did it again.
So at this point, could you see Rory while this drill was going on?
Yes, good.
Could you tell how she was doing during this drill?
She was not doing well at all. I could see how she was pale and breathing, and just wasn't even getting back up on her own. Coach was jerking her back up by her shirt. It was hard to watch.
How many times did Rory's teammates come and kick the legs out from under her?
About 15 times.
Why did it stop the 15th time?
Well, that time Rory fell and started convulsing, like kind of shaking, and I was so scared. I didn't understand what was going on.
Did anyone call medical attention?
The trainer said something about, to call an ambulance, and she was just, Rory was lying on the ground lifeless.
Did an ambulance arrive in time?
No, Rory died on the field.
Well, Aubree, during this whole practice, do you remember your team ever taking a break for water?
I don't remember any water breaks that day.
After you and Rory started running that Burma Road drill, were you or Rory given any breaks?
No, we weren't given any breaks.
And Aubree, did you hear Rory ever ask for a break?
No, she was too smart for that.
And after Rory told you about how she was feeling, did you say anything to Coach Taylor?
No, I did not.
Is there a specific reason why you didn't share those concerns?
Well, if you complain to Coach Taylor and you're tired or you're weak, you're just going to get more Burma roads or more. She doesn't like it. It makes her angry.
Objection, speculation.
Sustained as to that last portion of it makes her angry.
Move to strike.
It's stricken.
Aubree, in the past, have you seen Coach Taylor get angry at students when they ask for a break?
Yes, I have.
Did Coach Taylor ever ask Rory if she was okay during that practice?
No, she didn't.
Pass the witness.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterson, you and Rory were pretty good friends. I'm sorry, I missed that. Let me just make sure. Okay, let's start over. Miss Sitterson, you and you and Rory were pretty good friends.
Yes, we were.
In fact, you were best friends.
Yes,
You'd known each other your whole lives.
yes,
You went to school together.
we did.
You played soccer together.
Yes,
You were constantly at each other's homes.
yes,
So you know Rory's mom, Jordan Street.
yeah, met.
And Jordan Street is the plaintiff in this case.
Yes,
The plaintiff that you're testifying on behalf of today.
I guess so.
Now, you don't really like Coach Taylor. Am I right about that?
Well, I think she's a bully, yeah.
Well, you think that also he's to blame for what happened to Rory that day.
I do.
And that's not the only thing you blame Coach Taylor for.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but I mean, that's the main thing I blame him for.
Well, you also blame Coach Taylor for losing your starting position on the soccer team your senior year.
Well, that's his job as the coach. I mean, I didn't lose the position. I had to trade off, but I mean, that's part of the game.
Well, you were the starter on your junior year,
Right.
and then you weren't starting the whole season your senior year, right?
Well, I shared the position with another player.
That's right. You shared the position with Coach Taylor's daughter,
Right.
who you thought you were better than.
Well, I thought I was, but she's the coach. He makes the calls.
Well, you actually said that call made you really upset.
It did.
And you said it was actually crap.
I thought it was, yes.
Now, you said today that you think that what happened to Rory was Coach Taylor's fault. But I want to talk about what you were saying the day after Rory died. You thought that Rory's death was sudden.
Well, I never thought that we definitely didn't expect her to die. That's for sure. It was sudden.
You said you actually thought that it came out of nowhere.
Well, of course, yeah. She was a great athlete. I didn't expect her to die.
And that's despite the fact that you saw everything that happened at practice the day before.
Yes.
Now, I want to talk about that day, September 7th, 2018. You were at practice.
Yes.
And it was pretty hot outside.
It was really hot, yes.
Which isn't unusual for Waco, Texas.
No, not at all.
Especially in September.
Right, I mean, it gets hot.
And so it's not unusual for you to practice with your soccer team in September, right?
Right, yeah, we practice in September.
So it's not unusual for you to practice in hot weather.
No, it's not unusual.
Now, it's also not unusual for you to run Burma Road.
Right, that's correct.
In fact, you were running Burma Road at practice on the 7th.
That's right.
And you'd actually been running Burma for 15 minutes before Rory was sent over to Burma, right?
Yes.
And I just want to be clear, Ms. Sitterson, you didn't pass out that day, right?
No, I didn't.
You didn't collapse.
No.
From heat exhaustion
No,
or dehydration.
I didn't collapse.
And that's right. So you didn't collapse from fatigue either.
Right.
Despite the fact that you've been running that drill for 15 minutes longer than Rory.
Right.
Now, you also can't tell us about anyone else that ever has passed out after running Burma Road besides Rory.
Not that I know of.
Now, you said on direct examination that Rory was acting differently at practice on the 7th. Right?
Yes.
Well, now you know, sitting here today, that Rory actually had cocaine in her system at that time.
Surprised me.
That's right. You were very surprised to hear that.
I was shocked. Not something I'd ever seen before.
So you never saw Rory use any drugs?
No, not at all.
You'd never heard of Rory using any drugs?
No.
This wasn't something that was known about Rory as her best friend?
She was a great kid, so definitely no.
So just to be clear, Rory never told you, her best friend, that she had cocaine in her system that day?
That's right.
I want to talk now about Rory on Burma Road. You said in your prior deposition that Rory, when she first came over to Burma, seemed fine.
Yeah.
But then just a few minutes later, you started to notice some changes.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed.
You noticed that she was pale.
Right.
And that she was kind of stumbling.
Right.
Now, at that point, the two of you were on Burma and everybody else was about 20 yards away.
Yes.
So you were the only one that could really see that was going on just right in front of you.
At that point, when we were still over there, that's right.
And you didn't say anything at that point to Coach Taylor?
No.
You didn't say anything to the trainer that was at the practice field?
No.
And so after that, you asked Rory if she was feeling all right.
Yes.
And Rory said that she was actually feeling funny.
Yes, and that her chest felt funny.
That's right, that she was having chest pains.
Right.
Now, at that point, you still didn't say anything to a trainer?
No.
Or to your coach?
No, I didn't say anything.
And when Rory was telling you this, was she yelling it?
No, she was just talking to me.
So nobody 20 yards away heard what she said, to your knowledge?
Well, not that I know.
So as far as you know, Rory never told Coach Taylor that she wasn't feeling well that day?
Right.
And she never told the trainer either?
Right.
Pass the witness.
Can you redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Aubree, a few minutes ago, you were asked about whether or not you or anyone else other than Rory collapsed during practice. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Did you do all the same drills that Rory did?
Well, I didn't do the slide tackling drill that I've never seen before. I didn't do that.
Who did participate in that drill?
Well, just Rory was the one getting slammed by the other players.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. This witness may step down. Does plaintiff have any other witnesses?
No, Your Honor, but I would request permission to publish 2 exhibits in turn to read off of them. Both of these exhibits are already in evidence, and that's exhibits 14 and 16.
Okay, go ahead.
And Ms. DiGiuseppe, can we look at exhibit 14? And this is the autopsy report that was done for Rory Street. Can we zoom in on page 1? On September 8th, 2018, at approximately 1930 hours, I performed an autopsy on the body of Rory Street, deceased, McLennan County Memorial Hospital's Pathology Department in Waco, Texas. From the anatomic and laboratory findings and pertinent history, I ascribe the death to sudden cardiac death. And Your Honor, directing court and counsel's attention to Exhibit 16, Dr. McConaughey's report. If we could zoom in on page 2 of that document. Here is the opinion that I have reached in this case based on a reasonable degree of professional and/or medical certainty. Rory Street died as a result of heat exhaustion and/or heat stroke. And Ms. DiGiuseppe, we can take that down now. Your Honor, with that, I rest my case in chief on the condition that I be able to present rebuttal evidence if called for at the end of defense's case in chief.
Okay. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense would ask to make a mid-trial motion.
Okay, go ahead.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense moves for a judgment as a matter of law pursuant to Federal Rule of Civil Procedure, Rule 50. Even viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to the non-moving party, the plaintiff has failed to reach their burden today and by proving that a reasonable person would find that Coach Taylor was negligent and that caused Rory Street's death. Specifically, the plaintiff has failed to prove that this was foreseeable, which is required under proximate cause, one of the elements of negligence.
Response?
Your Honor, in order to determine this motion, you must view the facts in the light most favorable to the non-moving party, that being the plaintiff. Now, in this case, it's impossible for us as the plaintiff to get inside the head of Mr. Taylor and know exactly what he was thinking at the time he was taking these actions on September 7th. However, we have presented sufficient circumstantial evidence that Mr. Taylor, if he was acting reasonably and with reasonable caution, would have foreseen that his actions could have led to Miss Rory Street's suffering from serious injury or death. And specifically, you heard the testimony from Miss Aubree Sitterson, who said that when she looked at Miss Rory Street that day, it was clear to her that something wasn't right. She was struggling, she looked pale, and she even looked lifeless. And on top of that, Your Honor, when Rory Street fell to the ground, you heard testimony that this defendant grabbed her up, yanked her to her feet, and forced her to keep going. That shows that this defendant was negligent, and how Miss Street was acting that day would have put this defendant on notice that his actions could have led to this outcome, and therefore it was foreseeable as well.
Okay. The defendant's motion is denied.
Yes, Your Honor.
And defense, you may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. In this jurisdiction, may we ask for a mid-trial time check?
Yes. Plaintiff, you are at, 27:35. And defense, you are at 33:23 remaining.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Could I get that one more time, how much time I have left?
Yes, you're at 27:35 left.
Thank you.
Your Honor, the defense calls Reese Taylor to the stand. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Please introduce yourself to the judge and tell us where you live.
Hi, my name is Reese Taylor, and I live in Waco, Texas.
How long have you lived in Waco?
I've been in Waco for a long time, a number of years. And while I'm here, actually, I teach at Waco High, where I attended school when I was here in Waco. I love sports and coaching and all that. So I knew that from the moment that I stepped on, to my alma mater, Texas A&M.
So, Coach, I'm going to stop you right there. So we just heard a lot. So you went to Waco High School, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And you said you went to college. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I went to college at A&M to study physical education. I knew I wanted to be a coach, so that was the route that I took from the get-go. I followed that, and when you become a coach, you have to teach a little bit of everything. So I've been a coach for almost like 26 years.
Now, you said that you're the coach at Waco High.
Right.
What sport do you coach?
So I've been teaching soccer for like the past 20 years or 20 seasons. But when you're a coach in school, you teach a little bit of everything. So from basketball to volleyball to soccer, just a little bit of every sport. If we play it, I've pretty much coached it.
And so, but at Waco High specifically, which sport do you coach?
Soccer.
And how long have you been coaching at Waco?
6 years.
So you said that you've been a coach for a while. I kind of want to ask you generally about being a coach.
Yeah.
As a coach, do you keep up on what the best practices are for coaching your?
Yeah. So every year I attend clinics that are like recommended for best practices. And they kind of keep up to date with what they believe is like the best thing for, coaches to do for their team, their students. So I stay in touch with all that. I attend the seminars and clinics.
Now, when you go to those seminars, do they tell you whether the information is mandatory or just recommended?
It's not mandatory, it's recommended.
So I also want to ask you kind of about your coaching style specifically. How would you describe yourself as a coach?
Tough love.
Can you give us a little bit more than that?
Yeah. So discipline's a big deal. I am a lot more strict, because, when I went through coaching when I was a student at Waco High and all that, it was all about the discipline. And, I learned that from a younger age. So as I got older and I started to coach, I realized that, the team as a unit needs to be disciplined and, be focused on one common goal. And in order to achieve that, you need everybody's participation. So, teamwork, discipline, that's pretty much, discipline's my first thing. That's why it led to, 5 out of the 6 championships.
So with this discipline though,
right.
Is there a line that you won't cross?
Yeah, no, for sure. So what I like to think of, the best way for me to describe that is discipline is necessary, but you don't want to, like you said, cross the line because, think about it. If you have a student cross the line, they're no longer performing at their peak and at a good, performance level for your team. And at that point, you're no longer going in an upward trend. You're no longer performing well. So for you to cross that line is for you to kind of go downhill, and you don't want to do that.
Okay. So now I want to ask you more specifically about how you conduct your practices with your Waco team. Can you tell us what a normal general practice kind of looks like?
Yeah, we'll get out there, we'll scrimmage, we'll do some drills, and then if there's some students that are some, team members that aren't performing or, are lollygagging or dogging it, they'll just do a little bit of extra drills.
So I do want to talk about those extra drills, but first I want to ask you a little bit more about practice. What time do you generally start your practice?
In the afternoons.
And do you have a time estimate?
So like this one this day we started around 3:15, 3:30-ish.
And how many months of the year does the soccer team practice?
Oh, a lot. We practice a good bit.
Do you ever practice when it's hot outside?
Yeah. So, temperatures fluctuate, right? You practice in all sorts of weather. I have practiced in a little bit more of in a little bit more hotter weather. And the reason for that is conditioning, right? So you want to make sure that if they can handle that and, they're conditioned, then if the temperature goes down, you're golden, right? You can handle it more, you're stronger, you can play for longer.
Are there any other adults besides yourself that attend your practices?
Yeah, so we have our trainer, Jess, who's there. I try to have Jess at every single practice. She was there in this particular day to make sure that, all the students are fine and healthy and performing well. Because there's, a lot of students, and I want to make sure that, everybody's safe. Safety is the number one priority, right? Like if you're safe and you're healthy, only then can you actually perform and go on further.
So now I want to focus in on really why we're here today. And I want to ask you about September 2018. Are you familiar with that date?
Yes, I am.
Did you have soccer practice that day?
Yeah, we did.
Can you tell us, starting at the beginning, what happened that day at practice?
Yeah, so, our star player, Rory, wasn't taking it seriously, wasn't taking practice seriously. And, as a team, if your star player isn't, performing well and being serious during practice, the other students, the other teammates don't, they're not incentivized to, make sure to focus. Like, for example, you have a classroom where there's a student that's distracting the other students, you have to take disciplinary measures so that, you don't lose the sight of the classroom or the purpose of the class, and make sure that everybody's still kind of moving forward in a similar direction.
So when you saw that you felt Rory wasn't performing to that level, what did you do?
Yeah, so I had her run the Burma Road, with Aubree at that time. Aubree was already there at that point. Just so that, she could be a little bit more disciplined or put in a little bit more work. Cause I know she's capable of more, right? She's a star player. She's done so much more. Like, this wasn't anywhere near, what her limit was. She can do so much more.
So I'm going to stop you right there. You referred to an Aubree. Are you referring to Aubree Sitterson?
Yes, I am.
And I just want to ask, from your perspective, what's your relationship with Aubree Sitterson like?
Aubree was, a starter, and, I don't think that Aubree and I got along as well. I know that she was a little upset that, she wasn't starting as much and she had to share a little bit of playing time. And I'm aware of that. But at the end of the day, it's about the team, and we want to make sure that, there's an understanding of why I do what I do, right? Like, the goal is to make the team move forward, for everybody to prosper. So, there are things that happen there, such as substitutions and stuff, so I don't think that the relationship was as great, but I wouldn't say it's bad.
So once you sent Rory out to Burma Road, were you watching her at that point?
Here and there, right? But I got to focus on the other 13 kids I have, scrimmaging, but I wasn't actively paying attention just to, Rory doing Burma Roads. No, I wasn't.
So we've already heard a little bit about Burma Road today, but I do want to ask you about it. So what was Burma?
Burma Road. So when we say, like, you're on Burma Road, it's an extra drill where, you're sprinting for about 30 yards, then you dribble, and then you shoot, or you try to score a goal, essentially kick it, and then you bear crawl back 30 yards. And
so what is the purpose of using this drill?
So the way that I saw it when I did it in the 90s, and how it's been a tradition, it's a disciplining tactic, it's a disciplining tool, where, it's a little bit more of a disciplinary structure.
So you mentioned that you did it back in the 90s. So did you not start Burma Road?
No, I didn't start it. It was already a tradition at the school. I did it when I was a student. Jordan did it as well,
Okay. So now back to when Rory was on Burma Road. You said that you weren't watching. Did you send the trainer over to watch what was going on over there?
I didn't specifically say, hey, go watch Rory, but at the same time, the trainer is at the practices for the reason of also watching all the students, just like I am, where we're not just paying attention to one sole student, we're paying attention to the whole team.
When you would look out onto Burma Road, did you notice anything unusual about Rory's appearance while she was out there?
Unusual? No. You can tell, you could have told, that she wasn't trying as hard. She was still kind of just like not giving it her all. So was there anything out of the ordinary? No, it just looked the same as what she was doing in practice. She was kind of lollygagging it. She was kind of just dogging it.
Did she seem pale to you at all?
No, I couldn't tell.
Did anybody come up to you at that point and tell you that Rory looked pale or like she was struggling?
No, nobody did that. Nobody said that.
So what happened after you sent Rory to Burma?
Yeah, so like I said, she wasn't, performing as well even over there. So I had decided, okay, let's do a new drill, right? Slide tackling, right? It's where, a player will have a ball and dribble and another player will come and try to steal the ball from that player. The players do come into contact sometimes. However, the objective of that drill is to try to steal the ball, right? So, and this is a very common thing that happens in the game of soccer. So we've done slide tackling drills before, but I did it a little bit different this time. I had it where the students had lined up and kind of were in front of Rory so that when they came, like she knew they were coming to be able to maneuver.
So to be clear, did you call Rory back from Burma Road to perform this drill in a different area?
Yes.
And so what area was she performing the drill?
The practice field.
Okay. And at that point, when you called her over, did you notice anything unusual about her appearance?
No.
So she didn't seem pale to you?
No, she didn't.
Now, you mentioned that you'd never done this drill that way before. Had you ever practiced slide tackling at practice in a different way before?
Yeah, we practice slide tackling. It's a technique used in soccer. So, we keep up to date with soccer techniques.
About how many times did Rory run through the drill that day?
14 or 15.
And after the 15th time, what happened?
She didn't get up.
Now, before that happened, did you notice any signs that she was having some type of medical emergency?
No, absolutely not. Like I said, safety is the priority. You wouldn't push a player, let alone your best player, past their limits, right? So if I had seen anything, if I had heard from the trainer, if Rory had told me herself, Coach, I don't feel well. Well, stop right there. We have to make sure that she's in good shape, she's healthy and safe so that we can continue on.
Were you ever at any point that day trying to push Rory past her physical capabilities?
Absolutely not.
So we've heard today that Rory was acting differently that day. And I want to ask you a little bit about that. Excuse me. Are you aware now that Rory had something in her system at practice?
I am aware of it now, yes.
And did you know on September 7th that Rory had cocaine in her system?
Absolutely not.
As somebody who's been a soccer coach for over 20 years, in your experience, would it be dangerous for a student to come to practice with cocaine in their system?
Objection, Your Honor, as to improper opinion for this lay witness under Rule 701.
Response?
Your Honor, the coach has testified today that he has not only a degree in physical education and he is a health teacher, but he's also testified that he's been a soccer coach for over 20 years. He can say in his lay opinion, his lay experience, whether or not a student or a player coming to practice and doing physical activity would be dangerous if they had any type of drug in their system.
Can you lay some foundation that he would be able to make those claims and be sure that his opinions are limited to the scope of his personal knowledge and not the actual effects of cocaine on a person?
Absolutely, Your Honor. Based on, Coach, based on all of the trainings that you've gone through, based on your 20 years of experience and based on your experience as a health teacher, would you ever recommend one of your players to come to practice with cocaine in their system?
Absolutely not. It's very unsafe to do that.
Objection, Your Honor. Again, that the first part of that question where the witness said that they wouldn't recommend it, that's an opinion that is within this lay witness's rationally based perception. However, going on to say that that would be dangerous is a medical opinion and it requires medical training, which this witness does not have.
I think just the opinion saying it's unsafe is fine. If he goes any further than that and makes any type of medical opinion, then you can re-urge that.
Yes, Your Honor.
If you'd known that Rory had cocaine in her system that day, would you've allowed her to practice?
Absolutely not. No.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor. You've been coaching high school sports for the past 27 years. I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, I don't think I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You're the head coach of the varsity soccer team at Waco High.
Yes.
That's a position you've held for the past 7 years.
6, but sure.
Well, sorry, you sure it's 6 or has it been 7?
I thought I've been in Waco for 6 years, but I mean, close.
Okay. Well, close enough, 6 or 7. And as the head coach, you're aware of your responsibilities.
Yes.
You set the practice schedule for the team.
Yes.
And that means you decide when the players practice,
Yes.
at what time they practice,
Yes.
where they practice,
Yes.
and you even determine how long that practice goes on for.
Yes.
So generally speaking, you call the shots.
I'm the head coach. Yeah.
And the people that you coach, they're students,
They are.
teenagers,
Yes.
and you're the adult who's in charge of that team.
Yes.
And on September 7th, 2018, you were in charge of the practice that was going on at Waco High.
I was.
And the plan for that day was to run a scrimmage.
Yes.
And as you already told us, that practice started around 3:15 in the afternoon.
3:15, 3:30, yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor. It seems like I'm starting to lose you a little bit. If you could speak up, I'd appreciate it.
3:15 and 3:30, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Now, you knew that the weather was going to be particularly hot that day.
Kind of like every year around the summertime when it goes over into the fall.
And you chose to practice in the afternoon heat for a particular reason.
Yeah, as I said before, it was, to build up a little bit of conditioning and, get them in a better physique.
Generally speaking, you wanted to toughen them up.
Yep.
And so let's talk about how you treated Rory on September 7th.
Yeah.
And during that scrimmage, you noticed Rory missed some passes.
I did.
Said she missed some open shots.
You did.
So you gave Rory feedback.
Right.
You didn't think Rory was listening to you, did you, sir?
That's correct.
And in that moment, that made you angry.
Yeah, it was upsetting.
And that's because nothing makes you angry quite like a player who just refuses to listen.
I think what I said was, nothing upsets a coach more than their player not listening to them.
So this was upsetting to you.
Right.
And your response when you saw this was to punish Rory.
Or discipline is probably better.
You decided to set an example for the rest of the team.
Sure, you could say that.
Well, sir, I don't want you to say what I would say. I'm wondering if you believe that. And you believe that you were setting an example for the rest of the team.
What I believed was that if a student or a team member, let alone the star player, lollygags or, just doesn't give it their effort, it doesn't incentivize the rest of the team to also do that.
Got it. So in order to avoid that, you had Rory go run sprints on Burma Road.
Right.
And I want to talk about this drill, Burma Road. Now, first, you forced Rory to run sprints for 30 yards.
Yeah, part of the Burma Road.
Then you forced her to dribble for another 30 yards, running as fast as she could.
Right.
Then you forced her to take a shot on goal.
Yes.
And then you forced Rory to bear crawl on all fours back to the beginning where she started.
I think when you're saying, I forced her to do that, I didn't physically strain her to do that. It was a part of the drill and a disciplinary thing, just like Aubree was doing. It's not something that's, forcefully hey, you have to do this or else or anything like that, where you're saying force. No, it's a disciplinary tool. It's just a disciplinary method. It's another drill.
Sir, I understand you don't like the word forced, but Rory went and ran Burma drill because you told her to.
Yes.
And you told Rory to do these specific actions.
Go on the Burma Road.
And you told her that she had to do them over and over again.
So that's kind of how it works. Usually it's until the coach says that they're done.
Well, sir, I want to be clear. You're the one who calls the shots.
Right? The coach.
So that coach who decides when it's done, that's you.
That is, yeah.
So when Rory went to go run Burma Hill, it was you who could tell her when to stop.
That's correct, yeah.
And at no point while Rory was over there doing that drill did you offer her water.
Offer her water? No, I didn't. However, if they need water, if the players need water, we have water for them. They're allowed to ask for that. Oftentimes they can go get water even if we're not in a break, if they just ask.
Sir, I understand that that's your position, but I want to get you back to my question, which was simply that you didn't offer her any water.
Which I answered. I said, no, I didn't offer them.
And again, just talking about your behavior, you didn't tell her to take a break.
No, nobody, I didn't tell anybody to take a break at that point.
That included Rory.
Yeah.
Now, Rory did what you asked her to do, right? She went and ran Burma drill.
She did run on Burma Road, yep.
But when you saw her running that drill, you didn't think she was doing it well enough.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you decided you were going to make up a new drill just for Rory.
I mean, I just decided, I thought of a new drill. I'm sure I could use that on other students as well.
But up to that point, you'd never used it before.
No, I thought of something new.
So you called Rory over and you explained to the team this slide tackle drill.
So slide tackling is a drill that we would normally do. I just did it in a different manner this time.
Sir, I understand, but to get you back to my question, you called Rory over and you explained to the whole team this drill you were going to perform that day.
The slide tackling drill that we did, yes.
And as a part of that drill, you had Rory stand on one side of the field.
Right.
You had the rest of the team stand in a line opposite her.
Right.
And then you told Rory's teammates that when you blew the whistle, they were to go and slide tackle Rory.
Yeah. So the purpose of slide tackling is to try to steal the ball. Right. So if she has the ball and they have to go try to steal it, that was the purpose of the
Sir, I understand that, but my question was simply whether or not you told the players to slide tackle Rory, and you did.
Yeah.
So as this drill was going on, Rory was slide tackled over and over again.
Right.
About 15 times.
Right.
And as Rory was doing this drill, you could tell that she was struggling.
But that's the point, right? When you discipline somebody, it's not going to be easy for them. Anybody that goes through practice and works hard, it's going to be a struggle, right?
Sir, and I understand that that's your position, but that's not an answer to my question. I asked you simply if you noticed Rory struggling, and you did.
Yes, but that's the point.
Okay, and again, sir, at this time, your actions, you didn't tell Rory she could take a break.
Just like any other person on the team.
Sir, you're the coach, right?
Yeah.
You didn't offer Rory water?
No, but they could ask for it if they wanted it. I wouldn't say
You
no.
didn't send Rory over to the trainer?
No, I didn't see any need to.
You just told her to keep going.
I had the students get in line and do a drill.
And sir, so to get you back to my question, you told Rory to keep going even when she was struggling.
Everybody struggles under disciplinary tactic. Yes. Yes, the answer is yes to your question.
And I appreciate you getting to that answer. Now, at the end of this drill, Rory collapsed.
She did, unfortunately.
You noticed that she wasn't breathing.
Yeah, later.
Rory Street died under your supervision.
Yeah.
At your soccer practice.
At the practice, yeah.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Coach Taylor, we just heard about how you saw Rory struggling during the slide tackling drill. When you said struggling, did you mean in a medical sense?
No, absolutely not.
What did you mean?
Like I was trying to explain to the opposing counsel that when you get a disciplinary tactic, it's not easy, right? That's why it's a disciplinary tactic. If it were easy and the student didn't struggle, it wouldn't be a disciplinary tactic. So it wouldn't be smart for me to ask them to perform a drill, a disciplinary drill, if it wasn't difficult.
Thank you, Coach Taylor. No further questions, Your Honor. May the witness step down?
Yes. Is there another witness from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we would call deposition Jess Merriweather, and we would ask to read those portions in through question and answer format.
Okay, go ahead.
Ms. Sahakian, can you post the highlighted portions of the Jess Merriweather? Thank you. Starting on page 2 of Jess Merriweather's deposition, line 6. Good morning. Would you please state your name for the record?
Hello there, my name is Jess Merriweather.
Now to line 13 on page 2. How long have you lived in Waco?
Just a couple of years now. I grew up in Houston, then I went to Texas A&M for undergrad, and then I got a master's degree in sports training from A&M as well. After that, I worked for a couple of years at another high school in College Station before I got the job at Waco High.
And what is your job at Waco High?
I am an athletic trainer and I also teach health.
Now to page 5 of the deposition, starting at line 20. Question. You said that you worked with Rory as an athletic trainer. Did you interact with Rory in any other capacity?
Rory was in my health class that year, so I would see her 3 days out of the week in health class.
Was Rory a good student?
She was smart, if that's what you're asking, but I wouldn't call her a good student.
Why not?
Rory was always a discipline problem. It seemed
Objection,
like
Your Honor, as to improper character evidence.
Response?
Your Honor, this is not being shown to show any type of action in conformity. This is actually being shown to show lack of mistake on the part of Coach Taylor. We have a good faith belief that the plaintiff will be arguing today that there was no reason to discipline Rory, that the coach should have checked in on her because she wasn't somebody who would normally do this behavior, when in reality, there is evidence that this was not an accident and that this was not a mistake, and that's an exception to 404B.
Your Honor, if I may respond to that.
Yes.
Opposing counsel just said that this is being offered for lack of mistake, and then went on to explain that this is actually being used for propensity reasons. Opposing counsel said that there was no accident on the part of Mr. Taylor because Rory actually was a discipline problem on September 7th. And we know that because in the past, other people thought Rory was a disciplinary problem. That's saying that she had a character trait for disciplinary problems and that she acted in conformity with that disciplinary problem on September 7th. That's not an acceptable use for this character evidence.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Briefly, yes.
It is an acceptable use. Under 404B, you can offer character evidence that would normally be impermissible if it is being used to show lack of accident or lack of mistake, even if it would show action in conformity. And this falls into that exception.
Overruled.
Restarting the question from line 3 of page 6 of the deposition. Question, why not?
Rory was always a discipline problem. It seemed like she thought she could do whatever she wanted to do because she was a star athlete. And the worst part is that nothing fazed her.
Objection, Your Honor. Now this is becoming speculative. In these lines, this witness is now testifying to the mental state of Rory at other moments in time.
As to this statement, nothing fazed her. I'll sustain that.
Yes, Your Honor.
And
Ms. Hawk,
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I just anticipate that she didn't care because that was just an excuse to get out of class. That also I'm going to object to as speculative.
I agree to that as well.
so, Ms. Hawken, Your Honor, we would agree to just redact from, and the worst part is until excuse to get out of class. So, Ms. Hawken, will you start at the only discipline?
The only discipline I ever saw work on Rory was Coach Taylor's discipline.
Now starting on page 8, line 8. Question, were you at practice the day Rory died?
I was.
Now on line 18 of page 8 of the deposition, at any time did you see Rory stumbling, faltering, or slowing down in a way that would have indicated she was in trouble?
No, not at all.
Now on page 9, line 1 of the deposition, did Rory ever say anything to you about feeling bad that day?
No, never said anything to me. And here's the thing. I'm there to take care of those players and they know it.
Objection, Your Honor, again on speculation grounds, starting where it says they know it. And further down in this answer, Your Honor, they trust me and I trust them to tell me if something is wrong. He or she would have known to tell her. These are speculative statements about Rory's state of mind during practice.
So I'll sustain it as to on line 3, the phrase that says they know it, and then 4 and 5 where it says they trust me.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Hawken, will you please read the answer starting at line 2 with those 2 redactions?
No, never said anything to me. And here's the thing, I'm there to take care of those players. I'm kind of a combination trainer and guardian to the team. I trust them to tell me if something is wrong or if they're hurting. Rory didn't say a word. And she would have. Rory was a tough kid, but she knew her limits and would let me or coach know when she needed water.
Question on line 9, are players allowed to get water when they want it?
Yes, all they have to do is ask, even if we're not on a water break.
And Your Honor, that concludes our read-ins of the deposition from Jess Merriweather.
Okay, and does plaintiff have any excerpts?
Yes, Your Honor, we do.
Okay.
Directing court and counsel's attention to page 10 of Jess Merriweather's deposition, lines 6 through 14. And could I have my second chair, Ms. DiGiuseppe, turn on our video to answer the questions as I ask them?
Yes.
Do you still work at Waco High?
Yeah, I got promoted to head trainer about 2 months ago, so it's going great.
Do you still work with Coach Taylor?
Of course I do. I work with all the coaches, Coach Taylor included. In fact, Coach Taylor is the one that wrote me the recommendation letter for the promotion to head trainer. Again, Coach Taylor has a lot of faith in me and my abilities, and I just want to try to impress him.
And that's all we have from that deposition, Your Honor.
Okay. Defense, do you have anything further?
No, Your Honor, at this point, the defense rests and we would re-raise our mid-trial motion.
Okay. And that motion will be denied.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Then with nothing further, we can go into closings, and let me give you guys a time check. Plaintiff, you are at 17 minutes, 31 seconds remaining. And defense, you are at 15 minutes, 31 seconds remaining.
And Your Honor, I would ask for permission to present rebuttal evidence now that defense has closed their case in chief.
What rebuttal evidence do you have?
No, the defense just alleged that Rory Street died because of cocaine use. Our expert, Dr. McConaughey, can offer an opinion to rebut that assertion in the expert report that's already in evidence. And I just request permission to publish that portion and to read it onto the record.
Okay, go ahead.
Ms. DiGiuseppe, can we look at Exhibit 13, please. And directing court and counsel to the bottom of page 3, and then continuing on to the top of page 4 of this exhibit. It is also my opinion, within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that Rory Street's death was not a result of cocaine use. First, even if there was cocaine use on the day in question, there is no indication that Rory Street was a habitual user of cocaine, as indicated on the autopsy report by the fact that there was no irritation of the throat. Drug tests for cocaine typically have a lower cutoff level between 5 and 150 nanograms per milliliter, with 5 being very low and 150 being high. The amount of cocaine found in Rory Street's system was only 60 nanograms per milliliter, which is a finding consistent with the ingestion of only a nominal amount of cocaine, or that there was a great deal of time between ingestion and testing. Ms. DiGiuseppe, we can take that down. And with that, Your Honor, we close our rebuttal case and are ready to move on to closing arguments.
Okay, and your updated time now is 16 minutes and 21 seconds.
Thank you, Your Honor. And before I begin, permission to reserve all remaining time for rebuttal?
Yes, granted.
May I proceed?
Yes.
May it please the court, counsel. An 18-year-old high school student died at the defendant's soccer practice, trying to complete the defendant's punishment, and all while under the defendant's supervision. These are facts that have gone undisputed throughout this trial. Now, not once since Rory Street's death has the defendant taken a grain of responsibility for these facts. This defendant will work a student to death and then throw his hands up in the air and make any excuse he can to tell you why it's not his fault. That's because for this defendant, discipline and physical abuse are one and the same. And that's all tied into the power that this defendant lorded over the teenage students on his team. If a student talks back, he makes them run until they pass out. If a student pisses him off, well, he'll tell their teammates to hit them over and over again. And even when that student is on the ground and can't get back up, well, he'll go over, grab them, and force them to stand. That's physical abuse, not discipline. And on September 7th, when the defendant did those things to Rory Street, in 105-degree weather, he caused her death. Now, as the plaintiff, we brought this case today, and that means we had to prove it. We had to prove that the defendant was negligent and that the defendant's negligence was a proximate cause of Rory Street's death. Today, we've met that burden. Now, when we look at the negligence of the defendant in this case, it really breaks down into two distinct categories. First, we have the actions that the defendant took that were negligent, but then we have the actions that this defendant failed to take. Those were also negligent. I want to walk through those one at a time and talk about the evidence we heard. Now, this entire series of events begins with the fact that Mr. Taylor could not control his anger. He couldn't control it normally at practice, and he couldn't control it on September 7th. You heard from Miss Aubree Sitterson today, a classmate of Rory's. She was on the same soccer team as Rory, and she was at that practice on September 7th. And she told you exactly how angry Mr. Taylor got over the smallest things. And when Mr. Taylor was on the stand today, he tried really hard to try and tell you why his anger was justified. that he was right for getting upset at Rory. But Your Honor, that's standard rhetoric from a bully. It's always someone else's fault, not theirs. When you look at Rory's actions, what was there to be so angry about? She had an off day, and for some reason, Mr. Taylor just couldn't handle it. It made him livid. Your Honor, we have to start our analysis of this case by looking at that fact, that Mr. Taylor could not control his temper. Because this is what set up the whole power dynamic that led to Rory's death on September 7th. A teenager at a soccer practice has an off day, and for some reason, it's the adult who can't control their temper. Now, when the defendant lost his temper, what he demanded of Rory, it wasn't discipline, it was physical abuse. And I understand, high school sports can be intense, and there's good reason for that. If you're good, the way that Rory Street was good, then they can get you into college, get you scholarships, open up doors that would have never been possible. And because it's so important, we do expect coaches to push and challenge students to make them better. But on September 7th, that's not what the defendant was doing. He was just being a bully. He was punishing her because he could. And by the way, have you noticed that this entire trial, opposing counsel has insisted on calling the defendant Coach Taylor? Well, a man who treats students the way that we heard Coach Taylor treat Rory just doesn't deserve that title. What Mr. Taylor was doing, it wasn't coaching. It was physical abuse. And I want to stop for a second and think about how Coach Taylor or Mr. Taylor acted on the stand today. Now, I was asking Mr. Taylor simple questions. What did you do that day? Did you offer Rory any water? Did you give her any breaks? And it was really hard for Mr. Taylor just to answer those questions straight. Every time I asked Mr. Taylor about his actions, all he wanted to do was talk about how it was Rory's fault. Still today, he can't stop from going to that bullying mindset. A student died at his practice, and he's doing everything he can to shift the blame onto someone else. Your Honor, and that brings me to the second category of negligence, the defendant's failure to act. Numerous times on September 7th, Mr. Taylor should have realized that Rory was in trouble. She wasn't herself. She looked pale, lifeless, was struggling to breathe, was disoriented, and at times, she couldn't even get back up onto her feet. And when a reasonable coach sees that in a student who's never had those kind of problems before, well, a reasonable coach would do something to help them, offer them water, offer them a break. After all, that is exactly what his job was, to take reasonable care of the students under his control at that practice. He failed to do that. Because he failed to do any of those simple things, he was the proximate cause of Rory Street's death. When we're talking about a proximate cause, we have to prove that the defendant's acts or omissions were such that a person using ordinary care would have foreseen that the event or some similar event might reasonably result from those actions. During that practice, the evidence is clear. Rory Street just wasn't safe. Your Honor saw the autopsy report today. Rory Street died from sudden cardiac death. Because the medical examiner couldn't give us more of an opinion on what caused that sudden cardiac death, we reached out to someone who could, Dr. McConaughey, an expert in cardiology. And we included his opinions in a report that's in evidence right now. Ms. DiGiuseppe, can we look at that report? Thank you. Now, here is the opinion that Dr. McConaughey reached. Based on a reasonable degree of professional or medical certainty, Rory Street died as a result of heat exhaustion and or heat stroke. And based on what we heard, that really shouldn't surprise us. It was 105 degrees outside, and Mr. Taylor just kept pushing. And make no mistake, it was the physical exertion that caused Rory's death. Now, opposing counsel has brought up the 60 nanograms of cocaine in Rory's system. They said that that proves that, well, Rory actually died from cocaine. I want to make something clear. Opposing counsel and the defense, they chose to take on a burden today when they chose to pursue an affirmative defense. They took on the burden of proving to you that it was actually Rory's fault that Rory died that day. And for them, that 60 nanograms of cocaine is their smoking gun. They even had an expert write a report to try and convince you of that. But did you notice that the expert, not a cardiologist, not an expert in what causes a human heart to fail? And that is a huge problem for the defendant, because the cause of death here was sudden cardiac death, but their expert doesn't know anything about that. Here's what our cardiologist said about that cocaine. Ms. DiGiuseppe, can we pull up that report again? Dr. McConaughey told us that Rory Street's death was not a result of cocaine use. There was absolutely no indication that Rory Street was a habitual user of cocaine, and the amount of cocaine was so small, our expert referred to it as nominal. And Your Honor, I want to stop here for a moment, because in opposing counsel's opening statement, they told you that it's just dead wrong that Rory Street passed away from heat stroke, and instead, it was that nominal amount of cocaine, 60 nanograms per milliliter. Somehow, that just caused Rory's heart to stop. And I just ask you to think if that's reasonable. Is it more likely than not that someone with nominal amounts of cocaine in their system would drop to the ground dead just like that? Well, of course not. Rory Street was an athlete. She was in prime physical condition. There was no reason why a nominal amount of cocaine would randomly cause her death. And opposing counsel hasn't presented you with any evidence to support that assertion. Your Honor, I told you that the most tragic thing about this case was that Rory Street's death was so preventable. She should be here today. We shouldn't be in court litigating her death, litigating her final moments. But the defendant brought us here. His actions, his anger, his complete failure to use reasonable care. Find him liable. Thank you.
Sorry, May I proceed, Your Honor? Your Honor, the Street family has suffered a horrible tragedy, and no one denies that, especially not Coach Taylor. In fact, we even understand why Ms. Street has brought forward a lawsuit in this case, because it's only natural to want to find someone to blame when something horrible happens. But in this country and in these courtrooms, we don't hold someone responsible. We hold the right person responsible. And today, the evidence has clearly shown that Coach Taylor isn't the right person in this case. Because as hard as it is to say and as difficult as it may be for Miss Street to hear, it was Rory's choices that day that led to her death, not Coach Taylor's. Today, Your Honor, the issue for you to decide is whether Coach Taylor will be held responsible for Rory's choices. And today, the plaintiff had the burden to prove that to you by establishing 3 elements: duty, breach of that duty, and proximate cause. Now, despite opposing counsel's claims in his closing argument, we do not have a burden of proof in this case. And when Your Honor goes back into your chambers and looks at the jury charge that you've put forward in this case, there is no burden for the affirmative defense pled in the answer. And we are confident that opposing counsel has failed to meet their burden today, because instead the evidence has shown 2 things. First, that Coach Taylor's actions were reasonable under the circumstances. And second, that it was Rory's own choices that caused her death that day. So let's talk about that first thing that the evidence has shown, that Coach Taylor's actions were reasonable under the circumstances. Now, to be clear, Your Honor, no one here today denies that Coach Taylor had a duty to protect his students in this case. Parents, students, coaches themselves, we all expect coaches to not only train their players to perform well, but also to keep them safe. However, in order to breach that duty, Coach Taylor has to take actions that another reasonable coach in his position wouldn't have taken. So let's actually take a look at what we heard Coach Taylor did on that day. Now, opposing counsel brought up that he had them practicing in the heat, that it was pretty hot that day, between 100 and 105 degrees between 3 and 5 p.m. But, Your Honor, is that truly unreasonable to have players who live in Waco, Texas, practice outside in the heat when they've been doing it for all 4 years that they've been on the team? Isn't it more reasonable that you want to condition your players to be able to perform in the heat when they're going to be playing their games in the heat and they practice in the heat? That makes more sense. So then opposing counsel said, well, it's also what Coach Taylor didn't do. And he didn't check on Rory that day. Instead, he just sent her to Burma. But the thing is, we heard today that Rory didn't always behave, just like every other kid and every other 18-year-old. So it's actually not unreasonable for a coach, when he looks out and he sees his star player messing around on the field, to think and assume that she's just goofing off. It wouldn't be reasonable for him to think in his head, maybe she has cocaine in her system and I should check and see what's going on and if her body's overheating. We also heard today that it was unreasonable for Coach Taylor to be using Burma Road as a drill. But, Your Honor, what we really heard today is that Burma Road has been around for over 35 years. For 35 years at Waco High School, coaches sent their students to Burma Road. So if you really want to find somebody who is in the exact same position as Coach Taylor, you can look at the past coaches of Waco High School's soccer team. And you will see that they all sent students to Burma Road. So it can't be something that a reasonable person in Coach Taylor's position wouldn't have done. But then we also heard that it was really about using this new slide tackle drill. And admittedly, Your Honor, it was new. Coach Taylor freely admits that he'd never tried it before. But just because something is new doesn't mean that it's inherently unreasonable. Inherently unreasonable. Just because something is new doesn't mean that it's not safe, and doesn't mean that it's not proper to be doing as a coach. In fact, this drill itself involved slide tackling, which is something that is often practiced during soccer practice. It wasn't something that Rory Street had never done before. She'd slide tackled somebody. She herself had been slide tackled. Her mom said that in her deposition when we read that into you. So it wasn't unreasonable for Coach Taylor to put Rory through something that was supposed to discipline her, but also would help her become a better player. It's the whole point of discipline. But then we heard that the fact that Coach Taylor used discipline, that was unreasonable. And instead, opposing counsel said it wasn't discipline, this was physical abuse. And that is quite the strong charge to level against someone, especially when we have concrete evidence in the form of the autopsy report, which has been entered into evidence today. That, Ms. Hakim, will you put the autopsy report on the screen, please? That shows directly that there were no visible wounds on Rory Street's body when she was brought in and had her autopsy performed. Mr. Booth wants to say that slide tackling her was physical abuse. If it was, don't you think that we would have seen the markings on her body showing that abuse? This was soccer. This was a physical sport, but clearly it wasn't taken too far because Rory didn't show the signs of it. We also heard that he was unreasonable because he didn't follow the guidelines of giving water or shade or breaks to his players. But, Your Honor, what we actually heard from Mr. Taylor and from Coach Taylor himself is players were allowed to take breaks whenever they wanted. Players were allowed to ask for water whenever they wanted. Jess Merriweather said that in her deposition testimony as well. If Rory wanted water, Rory could have asked for water. But she didn't. And that's because what was going to happen that day, least of all Coach Taylor. So it's not unreasonable for him not to go up to her on Burma Road and say, Rory, do you want some water? Especially when he's 20 yards away, can't see that she's become pale, can't hear that she's told someone that she's not feeling good. Rory could have asked for the water, but Rory didn't. That wasn't Coach Taylor's choice. And finally, we heard that Coach Taylor's unreasonable because of the way he coaches, because he yells at his players. But we heard today, Your Honor, in Jordan Street's deposition, that she herself wanted that for Rory, that she wanted Coach Taylor hired. And Your Honor, the plaintiff doesn't get to have it both ways. They don't get to, on one hand, say that that's exactly the type of coach that I wanted for my daughter. I wanted someone who pushed her and motivated her and yelled at her. But then on this hand say, well, no, it's unreasonable for him to talk to his players like that. Your Honor, we hear all day, all the time on TV or in movies about coaches that act this way, and no one accuses them of being unreasonable. It's what a coach in Coach Taylor's position would have done, and hundreds, if not thousands, of coaches around this country yell at their students. Now, what Mr. Booth said about Coach Taylor getting up on the stand today and being pretty defensive, that's true. No one denies that. But Your Honor, think about the position that Coach Taylor's in. You yourself have seen many defendants, and you've seen that they have all different kinds of reactions. Some people, when they're defensive, get upset, and some people don't talk, some people laugh. Everybody has different coping mechanisms. And Coach Taylor, he takes this case very seriously. So of course he was defensive on the stand. That doesn't mean he wasn't telling the truth. And that brings me to the second thing that the evidence has shown, that it was Rory's choices that day that led to her death. Now, I want to be very clear that no one is saying that because Rory Street had cocaine in her system at the time that she died, that she somehow deserved what happened to her. No one is saying that she was a bad kid or a bad person. Everyone makes mistakes. Some people don't realize how dangerous the consequences of their actions are going to be, especially when you're just 18 years old. But we have to talk about this today because the reality is this is clear evidence that something else caused her death, something that Coach Taylor had no control over. So today we introduced the toxicology report into evidence. And when you go back and look at it in your chambers, you'll see that Rory did have cocaine in her system. That is undisputed. And we also admitted an expert report in this case. And when you go back and read it, you'll see exactly how that cocaine affected her system. A toxicologist, Spencer London, looked at how much cocaine was in there and looked at the depositions and all the information in this case, and he determined that the cocaine actually induced hypothermia in Rory's body. Now, when you look at that exhibit, you're going to see that hypothermia makes it so that your body can't control its temperature anymore. So while on a normal day, you'd be able to go run in 103-degree weather with no problem as a healthy, active 18-year-old soccer player, when you have cocaine in your system, your body can't regulate the same way. And it can cause your heart to give out. And that's what happened to Rory Street in this case. Now, the plaintiff wants you to believe that that isn't what happened because the amount of cocaine is just too small. But when you really take a look at those expert reports, while the cardiologist does say that it's a nominal amount, what he doesn't say is that nominal isn't enough to have an effect on someone's body. What the toxicologist doesn't say is that nominal is not enough to induce hypothermia in somebody's body. Anyone who has something in their body that is foreign could have a reaction to it. And that's what happened here. Now, the other reason that Coach Taylor can't be held liable today is because all of this that we're talking about, it was just completely unforeseeable. When Aubree Sitterson took the stand, she had to admit that she had no idea that Rory had been taking cocaine that day, that she had no idea, and she was completely and utterly shocked. Jordan Street in her deposition said the exact same thing. Coach Taylor told you he did not know, and that if he had known, Rory wouldn't have been practicing that day because he wouldn't have thought that that was safe. So if Rory's best friend doesn't know that she had cocaine in her system, and if Rory's mom, who lives with her, doesn't know that she had cocaine in her system, how in the world is Coach Taylor supposed to think that that's what's going on? What is really more likely, Your Honor? When you see someone messing around on the field, are you going to think that they're goofing off, or are you going to think that they have cocaine in their system and it is affecting their body and the way that they can function? That's certainly not the first guess that someone's mind goes to, if not the 100th. But the real reason in this case that you know that the plaintiff has not met their burden is because they have not established causation. Because causation is clear here, that Rory Street died because of cocaine in her system, and it is established through one example. There were two people out at practice that day doing Burma Road. There were two people out at that practice without a water break, without any water, without any shade, in the 103-degree weather. And for that reason, you must find Coach Taylor not liable. Thank you.
Your Honor, may I inquire as to how much time I have remaining for rebuttal?
Yes, you have 4.5 minutes.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
I want to clear a few things up that we just heard. Now, opposing counsel accused me of getting the facts wrong. So I want to clear this up. Now, in opposing counsel's answer in their preliminary documents, they established and said that they were going to be pursuing an affirmative defense. And at trial today, they did pursue that affirmative defense. They chose to prove to Your Honor that it was actually Rory's negligence that caused her own death. And whenever a defendant takes on the burden of proving an affirmative defense, they have a burden. So while as plaintiff, we came in with the initial burden of proving that Coach Taylor and Mr. Taylor's actions were negligent and approximate cause of Rory's death, we weren't the only ones with that burden. Opposing counsel had it as well. And it's not surprising to hear that she wasn't aware of it. It explains why there's such a lack of evidence to support the assertions that she's put forward today. Now, there's another thing that was said in the closing argument that I'd like to address. Opposing counsel pulled up the autopsy report and said, well, that slide tackle drill couldn't have been that tough. And what she said specifically was, there was no sign of it. Your Honor, Rory Street died in the middle of that drill. We never accused Coach or Mr. Taylor of going and punching Rory, of stabbing her or causing her wounds in that manner. What Mr. Taylor did was force her to complete a drill in the heat that put strain on her heart. That strain caused her death. And that's exactly what you saw in our expert report today. It wasn't cocaine. It was the heat stroke and heat exhaustion caused by this defendant. Find him liable. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Scoring judges, if you just reply to Robert's email with your ballots, and if everyone can just remain in the room, as soon as I get the okay that all ballots have been received, I'll go ahead and let you all go.